The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
When I was a wee girl, I never lacked for food. There was always plenty of food. My father was a farmer who had a great garden of vegetables. My mother was a fabulous cook. She made all her homemade brown bread every day and homemade soups. The only food item missing was fruit. We did not get much fruit. I remember every Christmas we got an orange in our stocking, and that was delicious. We got an occasional apple, but fruit was scarce. Now, we lived out in the country, and every September, Mum would hand each of us a bucket and say, go up the top of the garden up there and don't come back till you have that filled with brambles. And she would make bramble jam, which is like a blackberry. And very occasionally, when she would go downtown, she would buy bananas. Now, bananas are heavy, and she had to come home on the bus with her 2 big shopping bags. So she would usually only buy 2 or 3 bananas. So she would serve each of us a little piece of a banana. Now, I loved bananas, and they were so delicious. And I said one day, when I grow up, I'm going to buy me a whole bunch of bananas, and I'm going to eat them all myself. Now, it happened that my Uncle Peter was in the house visiting us that day. And Peter is from County Down, married to Bridget, Mum's eldest sister. Now, Peter is not the full shilling, if you know what I mean. He was the kindest, sweetest person you could meet. But he never had a real job. He always had these little jobs. He might be a flag man on the road for a construction crew some weeks, and sometimes he worked on a farm. And sometimes he was a day labourer down at the dock unloading a boat. But he was a sweet, sweet man. So he heard me say how much I loved bananas. So a week or so later, he arrived out at our house with a banana tree. I don't know if you've ever seen a banana tree, but it's about 4 feet long with dozens and dozens of bananas hanging on a central stalk. And he said, this is a present for Anna Marie. Now, my mother, who was devoutly Catholic, wondered if these were stolen bananas. Now, if these were stolen bananas, we might be committing a sin by eating something that was stolen. On the other hand, she couldn't ask him directly where he did get the bananas, because that would be an insult to his hospitality. Maybe he bought the bananas as a gift for me, but she strongly suspected they were stolen. Now, she couldn't tell anyone that we had these bananas, because if she had told anyone we had the bananas, maybe he would lose his job or be arrested or get in some kind of legal trouble. So we had to not tell anyone we had the bananas. So the first day the bananas arrived, I eagerly opened one, but it was brick hard, very dark green, and didn't taste nice at all. So Daddy, being the farmer, said, aren't they supposed to be yellow? I said, yes, indeed, they're supposed to be yellow. He said, I think these are not ripe yet. So I said, how are we going to get them ripe? And he said, leave it to me. So behind the kitchen boiler, there was a big cupboard. We called it the hot press. And he took the shelves out the hot press, and he put a big hook on the ceiling, and he tied a rope around the top of the stalk of the banana tree and hoisted it up to the inside of the cupboard. Well, day by day, the sweet smell of bananas were wafting all through the house. And every morning I'd come down before I went to school. I was about 8. And I'd say, are the bananas ready? And we would open up the door and look in, and no, not quite ready yet. Well, unfortunately, they all became ready at the same time. So So the very first day that they were ready, Mommy said, "Would you like a banana on your cornflakes?" Oh boy, it was delicious. She said, "Would you like to take a banana to school for a snack?" Oh yes. And when I came home from school, guess what I had? Another banana. This was wonderful for about 3 days. On the 4th day, my dad said, "Ah, Mary, don't be giving me any more of them bananas. They're causing me terrible constipation." And Mommy said, "That's funny, Willie, because they're causing me the opposite effect. I can't eat any more of the bananas either." So my sister, Kathleen, and my brother, Dennis, and I had to eat all the bananas. Now, we didn't have a freezer where we could have made banana bread and froze it, and she wasn't sharing our produce with any of the people in case it were stolen. And my brother Dennis said, "Why did you have to go and wish for bananas? Why couldn't you have wished for black grapes?" And I remember the day that he said to Mom, "Mommy, I wish I was very sick and in hospital." And my mom said, "That's not a nice thing to say. Why would you wish to be sick?" He said, "Because if I were sick and in hospital, people might come and visit me and bring me black grapes." So she went downtown and she bought him black grapes. So my sister, after 5 days of eating bananas, refused to talk to me. She fell out with me because she wasn't all that fond of bananas in the first instance. And my brother grumbled mightily about eating the bananas. So the moral of my story is, be careful what you wish for because you might get it.
I consider myself a fairly good creative problem solver, somebody who can think out of the box. Some of you might think of yourself that way too. But something happened last year that made me question my view of myself. I'll tell you what happened. I had been reading a great deal of ancient Egyptian literature as I was preparing for a performance. This one particular story really caught my attention. This is how it went. It's ancient Egypt. King Sneferu is wandering around the palace one day. He is bored. More than that, he's in a glum mood. His usual entertainments are just not lightening his spirit. The king goes to his closest advisor, who also happens to be the chief scribe and the court magician, to see if he's got any ideas. This is a wiser, older man. He suggests that they go for a boat ride. It will do you good. You'll be out in the fresh air, the sunshine. You'll hear the oars splashing in the water. You'll see the birds diving down for the fish, the green grasses, the flowers of the gardens around the lake. So that's what they do. 20 young women are gathered from the harem, and they have on their nicest beaded collars, earrings, and headbands on. They're rowing and singing along. The king is feeling better. It's working. Then the women stop rowing and singing along. "What's happening?" the king says. The women explain to him that the woman who was the lead stroke in the boat had stopped rowing because she had accidentally dropped her necklace in the lake. "I'll get you another," the king offered. I'd prefer my own," the young woman dared to say. This particular necklace had on it her sacred amulet. She had had this since childhood. She wanted that one back. Fortunately, the king was in a good mood. He looked upon his advisor once again to see if he had a remedy for the situation. Now, this is where I asked myself, what would I have done if I were the advisor? Well, immediately I thought, I see this story as a metaphor. It's describing how sometimes in the process of living, we lose a part of ourselves and how we go about getting that part back. But then I realized that I came to this conclusion because I have about 30 years of background and training in psychotherapy and Jungian astrology. What if you didn't have exactly my specific background and training? How would you answer this question? That led me to ask a friend of mine at the time who had gone to FIT for fashion design. She said, the king and the advisor need to go shopping with the women, bring them to Kohl's clothing store, get them some new dresses, and tell the women not to worry about the necklace. Oh, I thought to myself, I never would have come up with that conclusion. That made me think I needed to ask another friend who happened to be an engineer. He said, the king needs to throw a party, a big festival, invite everyone from the kingdom. They will come, they'll be given bamboo straws. Of course, the water in the lake is pure and clean. One at a time, they drink out of it until the lake is drained. The woman gets back her amulet, plus all the other items that have been lost over the time would be returned to their rightful owners. The feed stream for the lake would be released, and it filled back up again. Nope, I would not have come up with that solution either. I asked somebody else. She said, the king needs to have a diving contest. The person who retrieves the item gets a special prize. I hadn't thought of that one either. I asked other people and realized all of the different ways my thinking had truly been in a box. Since then, I've made a very deliberate point to approach new alternatives to handling life's problems, everyday ones that come along. And I have to say, it's helped a lot. With this in mind, I'd like to invite you to step outside your usual framework of solving life's challenges. You never know what solutions you might find.
I want to do the same thing that I did in the first story. I want to tell you a story, but I want to tell you a story about the story. I have been on a number of Native American cultural tours. It's just something I like to do. The first one that I went on was probably 10, 12 years ago. And it was the Four Corners Native American Cultural Tour. It was co-sponsored by St. Michael's Indian School near Window Rock, Arizona, and the Southwest Indian Foundation in Gallup, Arizona. If you went on the tour, you dealt with Sister Leola from St. Michael's. St. Michael's Catholic School has been on Navajo land since 1903. Sister Leola told you where to be, when to be there, and what to bring with you. Sister Leola ruled the tour. It went from Albuquerque, New Mexico, across to the Grand Canyon and back. You visited Pueblos, you visited Navajo, you visited Hopi, you were at Canyon de Chelly, Cañada del Norte, Monument Valley. We were in Albuquerque. We were in Old Town at the plaza. We had maybe 3 hours of free time. And Sister Leola had informed everyone at 1:15, you will be at this restaurant on this corner of the plaza. We will all eat together. I had been to Old Town a number of times, so I made a couple of circles, talked to a few people, purchased a few things, looked at some books. And when I came back, I noticed that Sister Leola was sitting on a park bench in the plaza in the shade. I thought about leaving her alone so she could just have some downtime, but there was also a lemonade stand there. So I asked her if she would like to have a lemonade. And we had a lemonade. And we were sitting quiet for a long time. And in light conversation, she asked what I did in Tucson. And I told her I was a storyteller. Sister Leola asked me to tell her a story. And we had a few minutes before we had to be at lunch. I told her a story that many, many tribes tell. It is normally accredited to the Cherokee people. It is a life lesson between a grandfather and his grandson. Many people know this story as the two wolves. A young boy came to his grandfather. He was very troubled. He asked his grandfather why things were not as they should be. Why would his friends want to do something they knew they were not supposed to be? And why did he feel so bad about not being with his friends? And his grandfather smiled and said, there is a battle going on inside of you. That same battle is inside of me and inside every other human. My son, it is like two wolves fighting. One wolf is good. He wants to do the right thing. He wants to walk the good road. And he wants you to lead a good life. The other wolf is bad. He wants to do bad things. He wants to walk the bad road. And he wants you to live a bad life. These two wolves are fighting. That is what you feel. You are feeling their battle, their war, their fight. And the boy sat, thought for a moment, and he asked, Grandfather, which wolf wins? The one that you feed. If you feed the good wolf, you lead the good life. If you feed the bad wolf, you feed the bad life. Sister Leola enjoyed that story, and she wanted to tell it to the children at St. Michael's. So every day on the tour, she would come and sit down by me on the bus and say, tell me that story about the two wolves. Part of the problem is when I tell stories, I never tell the story the same way twice. So I was probably confusing her a little bit. But we got it straightened out, and Sister Leola knew the story when the tour was over. A couple of years later, I got a letter from St. Michael's Indian School. It was from Brother Charles. Brother Charles was informing me that Sister Leola had passed. And I wrote a letter back to Brother Charles, essentially telling him what I have just told you. The next tour that I was on, Brother Charles sought me out and sat beside me on the bus, and he wanted to learn the story of the two wolves so he could tell it to the children at St. Michael's. And what I say to people at the end of that story is that Sister Leola, Brother Charles, the Cherokee people, and I hope that your good wolf wins and that you lead the good life. That's the way it should be.
Well, I better get started then. When I was little, baseball was big in Buffalo, And my family was really into baseball. And at night, my father and my mother and I used to sit around the kitchen table. We had a little Philco radio, and it stayed always on the kitchen table. And we would listen to the play-by-play of the Buffalo Bisons down at Offerman Stadium. On Sunday, my father and I would walk over to Delaware Park to watch the softball games. And he would tell me all the fine points of the game, and then afterwards, he'd buy me an Eskimo pie. And really, to this day, I love Eskimo pies. But the best thing of all, on Wednesday night, when the Bisons were home at Offerman Stadium, it was ladies' night, and my mother and I could go in for 15 cents. So we could take the trolley down to the Offerman Stadium, and if we got our peanuts outside, they were 5 cents a bag. If you waited till you got through the gate, they were 10 cents. So you can imagine my mother always made sure we got our peanuts outside. And she'd always tell me, we don't have to buy a program, because after all, we know the names and the numbers of all the players. And we don't know how to keep a box score anyway. So no problem, we didn't get a program. Now, we each had a favorite. My mother's favorite was Ollie Carnegie. I think he was a catcher. He was built like Babe Ruth, kind of heavy set. And when he connected with a ball, it went a country mile. But my favorite was a young rookie, brand new to the Bisons. His name was Lou Boudreau. Lou was tall and dark, and I thought the handsomest man that ever lived. But besides being a good player, he was so kind. He always acknowledged the crowd. He'd sign an autograph for anybody that asked. He was just a very, very kind man, and I was just agog about Lou Boudreau. The second year that he signed on as a rookie, wonder of wonder, miracle of miracles, Lou Boudreau and his wife and new baby rented the house right next door. Oh, I couldn't believe it. Every day I would be standing, just sort of nonchalantly standing on the front lawn when it was time for Lou to go down to the trolley, to get the trolley to go to Offerman Stadium. And he'd be carrying his favorite bat and glove. And he would tip his hat and he'd say, "Well, hello there, Missy. How are you today?" How was I? I was halfway to heaven. Well, in the part of Buffalo where we lived, the houses were too close together to admit a driveway. And so the Boudreau's kitchen was only about 10 feet from our dining room. And in those days, of course, no air conditioning and nobody had a fan. But nobody closed their windows all summer long. And so the Boudreau's kitchen windows were open and our dining room windows were open. And when the Bisons were home, and it wasn't a Wednesday night, I would figure out what time Lou would be coming home, and I would crawl out of my bed, and on my hands and knees, I would crawl out into the dining room, up against the windows, high enough that my ear was high, but not too high. And I would just listen. And they would talk, he and Mrs. Boudreau, while they ate a little light supper, they would tell about the things that the baby did that day, and they would talk about who was getting traded, who was getting married, who was going to have a baby. Nothing personal. And I never told anybody anything that they said. I just loved being part of their life. It was an enchanted time for me. I just felt as if I fell into heaven. Until one night, something woke my father. My father got up, came down the hall into the dining room, flicked on a big overhead light. He was wearing his long johns. Looked down and he saw me. "Betty, what the hell are you doing?" Oh, I couldn't speak. I looked at his feet, and I knew that Mrs. Boudreau knew exactly what I was doing. So I slithered back to my bed. Well, I never again eavesdropped on anybody, and I never again stood out on the front lawn waiting for Lou to go down and get the trolley to go down to the field. But I never lost track of his career, and he had a wonderful career. He stayed in Buffalo for a couple of years, and then he went up to the majors, and he worked for the Cleveland Indians at Lakefront Stadium. And my father and I, and my mother also, went up, or I guess west to Cleveland many times to see him play. After a while, he became general manager of the Indians, and the sports pages were full of it because he was the youngest one who had ever been raised to general manager of a major league team. And he had a great career, and no scandal was ever applied to him. He always stayed married to Mrs. Boudreau. He was well known for being a really honest, good manager, and he was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame. And my daughter and her 3 children and I went down to Cooperstown so that we could see his picture and his favorite bat, his favorite glove, and a rundown of all the remarkable things that had happened in his career. And Lou lived to a couple of years ago, and when my grandson was in college, and Michael, my grandson, sent me a sympathy card, and on it he wrote, "It's hard to lose a hero." And yes, Michael, it's very hard to lose a hero.
All right, well, I've got a story, but it starts with St. Patrick, a toast to St. Patrick. St. Patrick was a gentleman who, through strategy and strife, stole all the snakes from Ireland. Here's toasting to himself. But not too many toastings, lest you lose yourself and then forget the good St. Patrick and see all those snakes again. Well, you all heard tell of the blessed St. Patrick and how he drove all the serpents and all manner of venomous things out of Ireland, how he bothered all the varmints entirely. But for all that, there was one old serpent who was too cunning to let himself be talked out of the country or made to drown himself. St. Patrick didn't well know how to manage this fellow, until at long last he bethought himself, and he got himself a strong iron chest with 9 bolts upon it. And then one fine morning he walks up to the place where the serpent used to keep. Now the serpent, who didn't like the saint at all, and small blame to him for that, began to hiss and show his teeth at him like anything. "There now," says St. Patrick, "what's the use of making such a piece of work about a gentleman like myself coming to see you? 'Tis a nice house I have got built for you again the winter, for I'm going to civilize the whole country, man and beast, and you can come and look at it whenever you please, and 'tis myself will be glad to see you." Now the serpent, hearing such smooth words, thought that though St. Patrick had drove all the rest of the serpents into the sea, he meant no harm to himself. And so he slides up to see the saint in the house he's got built for him. But when he saw that heavy iron chest with 9 bolts upon it, he thought himself betrayed and was for making off from there as fast as possible. I think it's too small it is for me, St. Patrick. Thank you very much." And St. Patrick said, "Stop if you please. You're out in that, my boy, anyhow. I'm sure it will fit you completely. And I'll tell you what, if you'll only try to get in, I'll bet you a gallon of porter that all of you will fit inside that chest." Now, it was great joy to the serpent, the thoughts of doing St. Patrick out of a gallon of porter. And he was very thirsty after his long slide up to see St. Patrick. So, swelling himself up as big as he could, in he got to the chest, all but a little bit of his tail. "There, now you see, I can't get in my tail. The house is too small for me. I've won the bet." And what does St. Patrick do? But he comes up behind the heavy iron lid of the chest, and putting his 2 hands to it, down he slapped it with a bang like thunder. When the rogue of a serpent saw that heavy iron chest coming down on top of him, and with his tail like a shot, for fear of being whipped right off him, St. Patrick began at once to bolt the 9 iron bolts. "Oh, murder, St. Patrick, won't you let me out? I've lost the bet fairly, and I'll pay you the gallon like a man." "Let you out?" said St. Patrick. "To be sure I will, by all manner of means, but you see, I haven't time just now, so you must wait till tomorrow." What does St. Patrick do? But he picks up that heavy iron chest with the serpent still inside, and he pitches it into the lake there, where it is to this hour for certain. And many a living man has heard the serpent crying out underneath the water, "Is it tomorrow yet?" Which, to be sure, it never can be. And that's how St. Patrick drove the last of the serpents out of Ireland. Or so I've been told.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round